Hi there, and welcome back. This is episode 3 of season 2 of the Gardener Ben podcast. Today I'm going to be speaking with a really exciting online account, a real internet sensation. Urban Farm Kitchen will be joining me a little later in the podcast for a brief conversation. This week in the garden has been incredibly busy, and for those of you that follow along on social media channels, you know that I have finally waded my way into what will be called the Wintergarden. An area of the garden here at North Lodge, just on the outskirts of the New Forest, which used to house our flock of chickens. And when we first purchased North Lodge in 2018, it was the only area that was relatively clear and would be quite simple to get fenced in quickly. We fenced it in and housed our chickens there for around 6 years before moving our flock on to a local farm in preparation for this particular project. This is going to be known as the Wintergarden and occupies an area of space on the plot that was in 1992 sold off in preparation for building. Planning failed and the chunk of land came back onto our property and was re-amalgamated onto our plot when we purchased the house. For this reason, there's a bizarre internal laurel hedge running along the inside of our driveway, which separates this area off from the rest of the garden. There's a couple of stands of hazel there, and it measures around 10 metres by 15 metres, so is about the same size as most people's domestic gardens here in the UK. We opened the garden to the public once again last year, and for a quick fix to make it look presentable, we laid a quick bark path and edged it with some stone. I had grown quite a lot of pumpkins in the greenhouse and decided just to pop them into the ground and call it a pumpkin patch. I also added some homegrown cosmos and some cornflowers just to give it some interest. The area was a real hit, but now we're through the winter, it's barren and empty and represents the last frontier in our plot. So I've decided to rehouse all of the roses that were reviewed during the 2024 season out of the trial beds and into this area, which involves me removing the internal laurel hedge, which is only about 6 foot high and about 6 foot thick. I'll be removing this with a chainsaw and then pulling out the root systems with my works truck before adding a huge amount of soil conditioner. Outside the cottage in 2 half oak barrels stands 2 yew pyramids, which are now around 8 years old. These, along with the 640 other plants that came with us from Dynamite Cottage to this particular house in April of 2018, have now got really quite large. They were only about 4 feet high when they came here, and are now standing over 8 feet and are getting a little bit unruly to be standing at the front of the cottage. These are desperate to be planted into the ground and will make up some really great height and make the bones of the new garden. I've also, because I'm a sentimental old fool, been growing some laburnum trees from seed. Again, when we moved into the cottage, we strolled around Fordingbridge and I came across a laburnum tree in full bloom. It was such a strong, insipid, golden colour that I made sure I made a mental note and returned to the tree a couple of months later to harvest some seeds. Once we'd cleared the vegetable and cutting garden and erected the greenhouse, the laburnum seeds were one of the first things I sowed, envisaging that I'd have quite a few plants germinate and be able to grow myself a laburnum tunnel, as many of you may have seen at large stately homes and RHS gardens. In reality, only 2 germinated, and I ended up with 2 quite strong trees, which once again I've been shuffling around in the garden for some time, not really knowing what to do with them. I've decided to form these into an archway either side of the path that was laid, ready for the garden to be opened back last June. So I've got some nice bare bones. So in total, around 20 to 22 roses, the 2 huge yew pyramids and the laburnum trees that I've been growing will make up the bones of this garden. Because it's really close to the patio and only just across the drive and visible from the actual porch door of the house, I'm going to intend to fill this area with winter plants because it's got a path already laid in it, and I don't like wandering around in the main path of the garden when the weather is particularly wet and the grass is particularly sodden. So I've decided to fill the area with cornus, dogwoods, and of course other things like hellebores and snowdrops. Highly scented things like hemerocallis, which is the witch hazel, to add a real contrast to the garden. Hopefully an area we'll be able to use during the winter months without traipsing around on the lawn. If you want to keep abreast of the development of this area, make sure that you're following along on Instagram, TikTok or YouTube. The other things that I've been doing this week is I headed over to my favourite dahlia nursery a couple of weeks ago and picked up my new dahlia tubers. I'm going to get these going into the greenhouse, and I'm going to talk you very briefly through the process that I use to ensure that you have plenty of success. My greenhouse is unheated and relying 100% on the solar gain it gets from the sun. This is more than enough to get your dahlias moving. Keep yourself organised when it comes to potting up dahlias and make sure that you label them all clearly and don't get them mixed up. When it comes to bringing on new varieties, I like to pop them into around a 3 or 4 litre pot with around half to an inch of deep of horticultural grit at the bottom of each pot. I find this keeps the slugs and the snails at bay and stops them moving up through the compost and feasting on the tubers early in the season. I then place the dahlia tuber into the container and fill it with peat-free, fully organic garden compost, leaving the eyes or the very neck of the tuber exposed, before covering it once again in around an inch deep of horticultural grit, crushed eggshell or sharp sand, once again giving the plant a good amount of protection from the slugs and snails, which can cause catastrophic damage just as the tuber is actually starting to grow. Now in early March, I'm going to be getting the dahlias ready to get in the ground, and they'll be spending the next couple of weeks in the greenhouse getting ready. As soon as they're up, I might even take some cuttings, and I'll talk you through that process at another time. Right, let's get on and have a word with Urban Farm and Kitchen, and let him describe exactly who he is and what exactly he does.
Hi Ben, thank you for having me on. It's so hard to label yourself these days, as you probably know. We all tend to wear several hats. But I suppose the best label or title would be content creator. And I have my thoughts about that title anyway, but I digress. Essentially I create content in various forms of media. I love photography. It's my passion. It has been for a very long time. I particularly enjoy shooting and sharing garden and food photography. It's really a big part of my media business, and it's part of the work that I do with clients and brands as well. I also run a food blog called Urban Farm Kitchen, which also happens to be the name or the title of all my social media handles as well, across all platforms. It's at Urban Farm Kitchen. I create educational garden-to-table content. For the last 5 years, I've also been involved with another project, a gardening masterclass that's really been geared towards urban and suburban gardeners. So I've worked with hundreds of students from around the world. It's been very rewarding. And also I was very lucky in 2023 to publish my first book. I was given the opportunity to write and photograph a garden-to-table book, which I'm very proud of. So I guess you can call me a content creator, a published author. Maybe I'll let you decide what I should be called.
Well, I think it would be incredibly wrong for me to actually try and label you. All I can say is that your accounts and online presence are absolutely beautiful, and I really enjoy your take on not only food but also the photographic staging of your accounts. Everything always looks so beautiful, so appetising and so colourful. I also have to say that I have to tip my hat to you with the publication of your beautiful book. Being at the very beginning of this particular process myself, I'm trying not to get too caught up in my own head. It's a huge and very daunting subject. Mine is going to take around 18 months to pull together, but I'm very much looking forward to sharing it with everybody when it's ready. I'd love to know, because for every gardener and every cook, it's different. For you, what comes first? Was it cookery or was it growing your own food? Because I know for many people, these things go hand in hand.
I would say cooking came first. It is my first passion, and gardening kind of blossomed or grew from that. I think people expect me to have some sort of farming background, maybe come from a farming family, but it's actually quite the opposite. We were always city people. I don't have any stories about sitting on my grandfather's lap while riding a tractor. No stories like that whatsoever. My father did garden casually, but I do feel like he only got serious about it after I did. I didn't go to school for horticulture either. I have an engineering background, which I still use today in my day job. Although at this point, it feels like I have several day jobs, to be quite honest. For me, the idea of creating garden content on its own was not very appealing, and creating food content on its own is very challenging because it's just such a competitive landscape. Joining the two together made sense for me. Also gave me the chance to touch on other sort of tangential topics like culture, history, and politics.
This is why I love this kind of media. It's really interesting to find out your take on things. For me, it started with gardening, and I always end up growing things which I have absolutely no idea what to do with. So your take on things is completely the opposite to mine, which to me is absolutely glorious. I honestly can't believe that you're managing to maintain your blog, your social media platforms, your subscription-based content, and write a book whilst maintaining a full-time career. It's absolutely astonishing you're managing to find time in the day for all of those things and do them incredibly well. Out of the platforms and the ways that you share your media, which is your favourite and why? I'm slowly moving away from posting huge amount of content on Instagram, for instance, and pulling more towards longer based content on my YouTube channel, and I'd love your take on it.
I think at the end of the day, Instagram will remain my primary platform. It's where I have most of my followers. I'm also a big fan of Pinterest these days. It's very visual and photos still dominate there, which I really appreciate. It's also an excellent platform to help drive traffic to my recipe blog where I make the bulk of my income. So it is definitely something that I'm spending more time on and trying to optimize and learn about it from a search engine optimization or SEO perspective. I do want to get into YouTube as well, but I don't have the patience for long form content. I don't really like watching YouTube personally. I always tend to skip if I'm watching something that I'm trying to learn, a specific topic, whether it has to do with, let's say, artificial photography, and I'm trying to learn how to use my large lights or my flash. I tend to just skip through to try to get to the good bits. So I just don't know if I'm the type of person that would want to create this kind of content, and I'm sure recording it and editing it is also a very big ask. So for now, I think I'm more focused on the short form video formats of Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts.
That's really interesting to hear your point of view on it. For me, I've never looked at Pinterest, not opened it once. I come across it sometimes when I'm online shopping, but don't really pay it much attention. And it's something that was brought up by Tristan only a few days ago in a previous episode, who said he used it for inspirational gardening content, so maybe I'll have to check it out. For me, making longer content is much more in my wheelhouse. I find it much more organic and a lot easier to produce. I obviously tend to ramble on, almost like I like the sound of my own voice. But for me, I don't do any editing whatsoever. I clip off the ends with the awkward pauses and silences, and clip off the ends as I reach towards the camera to make sure it's constant and of a decent quality, but I never actually splice any content back together. Many people are utterly shocked to find out that I operate all of my accounts from a mobile phone. I don't actually own a laptop and don't do anything whatsoever on a computer. And if I had a laptop or a computer, I'm not entirely sure I'd know what to do with one these days. Now, I'm classified as having a fairly large social media footprint, but your accounts are really huge. I was just wondering how you deal with the pressure of posting content and whether you encounter any problems or negativity with your posts. And if you do, how you deal with that.
Yeah, I don't shy away from the hard conversations. I've had my fair share of death threats and insults and hate speech thrown my way. I don't let it bog me down at all. One piece of practical advice I can give your listeners, especially those on Instagram, is to use all the privacy tools that you have at your disposal within your accounts. So Instagram has a very handy feature where you can create a hidden word list. Essentially, you add words to this list and Instagram will hide all the comments and messages that contain those words, or even a phrase. You could put in a phrase or even an emoji. So those comments and those messages will be hidden from everyone hidden for everyone except for the person who made them. So the person who made that comment, who sent you that hate speech, will see that comment, but it's like them screaming into the void. No one else will see it, no one will comment on it, no one will like it. So let them scream into the void is what I say. And I think the best way to do this is if you start noticing a pattern in some of the things that are being said to you, or if there's topics that you just don't want to broach. So you figure out, what those keywords or key phrases are, or even emojis. If there's some emojis out there that, a lot of your haters or the people who troll you use, you can use the hidden word list to hide those emojis as well. And I've done that. I probably have something like 50 phrases, words, and emojis in my hidden word list. So I would say use all those privacy features to your advantage.
Wow, I find that absolutely astonishing and insane that people can get so riled up about things and say such horrible and hurtful things online. I have to take my hat off to you in the way that you deal with it so well and so professionally. I had no idea that Instagram had any of those features. So after I've recorded this podcast, I'm going to go off and take a look at those. I had no idea that you could block words or phrases, and of course emojis, as you detailed as well. So I absolutely love it. Well done for defending your space. As I mentioned before, absolutely everything that you post online looks absolutely beautiful. It's always so colourful, so beautifully staged and arranged. It all looks so enticing and ultimately so edible. Is there a particular crop that you like to grow and then in turn into a particular favourite dish?
I think the answer to this question would be quite obvious to anyone that follows me or knows me personally. It's got to be tomatoes, hands down. It's my favorite crop to grow and eat. And of course, I love photographing tomatoes. They just come in so many different colors and shapes and sizes. And it's almost like they have unique personalities. And I think that because I've grown so many tomatoes over the years, I've ended up with such a large collection of tomato recipes that I've ended up having to create a special category for them on my blog. So hands down, tomatoes, big ones, small ones, cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes, beefsteak tomatoes. I'll take any tomato in any form that I can get.
Now, I think the pictures you take of tomatoes are stunningly beautiful. You're right, there's so many colours, forms and sizes, specifically with the heirloom varieties, which you seem to focus on. But tomatoes are the one food that I absolutely detest. I'm really funny with them. I never have liked them at all. Specifically, very, very specifically, it's the seeds that do me in. I don't think anything needs that many seeds in it. It's just horrible, especially the cherry and plum tomatoes. Once they're diced and cooked, they don't have to be cooked completely. I'm absolutely fine with them. I can eat tomato sauce, pasta sauce. They can be cooked in quite large quantities into dishes as long as they're cooked and softened off. But I cannot bear them exploding in my mouth, and the very words coming out my mouth makes me all go all and give me the heebie-jeebies. So I can't join you on that particular front, I'm afraid. Your book that was recently published has been an amazing success. So I want to offer you my personal congratulations. Do you think you'll write another? And if so, is it going to be on the same sort of subject?
The book writing process was challenging. There was lots of frustration in dealing with editors and publishers, lots of ups and downs throughout the entire process. And I wrote my book during the pandemic. And even just getting the books delivered, they were printed in China, 99% of the books out there. And having COVID delivery delays, I believe the books were on a ship for almost 3 months, coming from China all the way to the United States, and then to get disembarked and sorted. As you can imagine, it's an incredibly frustrating process. But, having said that, it was also incredibly rewarding. I think it really catapulted my career and my public presence. It's allowed me to grow my media business. It allowed me to be featured and quoted in some of the most amazing websites and magazines like marthastewart.com. I never thought in a million years that I would see my name printed on marthastewart.com, let alone on 10 different articles. So it's been incredibly rewarding. Will I write another one? If I'm given the chance to and it's the right time for me, then I think absolutely yes. But I might give myself a year or two of reprieve until I need to start thinking about that.
I mean, giving yourself a year off sounds like a wonderful idea. Honestly, I don't know how you're maintaining it all, because maintaining my social media presence, my blogs, and obviously this podcast, as well as working full time, I find absolutely exhausting. And by the sounds of things, I'm in for a very long and bumpy ride with my book, which, as I said, is still at the very, very early stages. I'm astonished, growing from here in the UK, that you managed to not only produce such a huge amount of quality fruit and vegetables and produce from your relatively small garden, but you also do it from Toronto, Canada, which means your growing season is even more limited than it is here in the UK. For those that are new to growing, are there any hints, tips or hacks that you could share that mean people could elongate their growing season and get the best from their gardens and increase their success, to help them combat the changeable weather and, of course, climate change? Now, here at North Lodge, I'm incredibly lucky. We have around a third of an acre at home, complete with a vegetable and cutting garden all set up for the growth of produce, which is centred around my greenhouse.
I'm a big fan of embracing the seasons, and if you're lucky enough to live in a place where you can appreciate all four seasons, I think it's really the best to move with nature and not try to force things too much. That's why I don't have a polytunnel. That's why I don't have a greenhouse. The winter months are for downtime, other projects, planning the following garden season. But I will say that I am a fan of using low tunnels, hoops and cover in the spring and fall, just to extend the season slightly. For specific reasons. Let's say it's autumn and winter's around the corner. You're looking at the forecast and you're seeing a freeze coming soon. But your fall crop hasn't quite matured yet. What I would do is I would slap on a low tunnel, maybe put on some plastic sheeting or frost cover, just to help the crops mature, under these unfavorable conditions. So use it sparingly, use these season extension techniques sparingly, but still manage to enjoy the downtime that the winter months provide.
There's some really helpful and very, very useful practical tips there. So thank you very much for sharing them. People often say that it must be nice. I get this comment a huge amount, especially on YouTube, that the growing season here in the UK is so long and our weather tends to be quite mild during the winter. It's very rare for us to see a frost of below about -3 or 4, which means that most things, including the lawns, carry on growing during the winter months. In reality, it's actually really quite challenging and very annoying. The garden never really goes to sleep. And it's one of the main things that when we do leave this particular property and either head to Scotland or over to New England, that I'm really looking forward to a much more defined growing season and the garden going to sleep during the winter months, enabling me to get on with other projects, rather than having to feel like I need to go out there, clear borders, cut things back, and of course mow the lawn and clear the leaves during the winter months. So I have to say, I'm incredibly envious of the time that a lot of people in the colder climates when they're growing get as downtime during the winter months. Fast forward a few months or years to find myself and Mark in a different place in the world, moaning about the weather and wishing we could get on during December, January and February, and instead we'll be cloaked in snow, not being able to do much at all. You're an inspiration to tens of thousands of people worldwide every single day, with your recipes and your posting. What's next for you?
Right now, my focus is primarily on growing my recipe blog. I'm very fortunate to get millions of website visitors a year. I'd love to continue growing that. I share quite a bit of culturally important recipes, and the feedback has been really wonderful. Connecting with people and seeing someone from Manchester make one of my recipes, or seeing someone from Japan make one of my recipes and loving it is very rewarding. So I definitely want to continue that. There's just so much we can learn from each other when we share recipes and stories. So I would say expect more recipe content, more garden to table content, and a smattering of garden content too here and there. So essentially more of the same.
Well, I, for one, am much looking forward to seeing lots more of the same kind of content from yourself. I was talking to Sarah from Meadow and Thyme in a previous episode just a week or so ago about how astonishing it is about where our content is seen and who it is consumed by. So it's lovely to hear that you're connecting with your audience worldwide and you find it comforting and enjoyable that your recipes and blog are being consumed all over the world by people from many different backgrounds. We never really know where our accounts end up and who they touch. So it's one of the very comforting things of being a content creator. This leads me on to the standard question I ask all guests who join me here on the Gardener Ben podcast. If you had to leave the property that you live at now in a hurry and couldn't return, which plant or plants would you take with you and why?
I wouldn't take any plants, to be quite honest. I would make sure to take my seed storage boxes, which will help me grow tens of thousands of new plants. So, my large seed collection would be one of the first things I would grab if I needed to leave the house. That and my cats. My husband can manage on his own, but the cats and my seed boxes are my priority.
That's an amazing answer, and the first time that one's been given. I love the fact you're going to take your seeds with you so you can grow loads and loads of plants in the years to come. I do, however, have to say that I feel a little bit sorry for your husband being left to fend for himself, but I'm very glad that you've decided to take the cats with you as well. Of course, Ethel is coming with us, as well as a few roses I've got tucked under my arm. I'd like to extend to you my personal thanks for joining me today on episode 3 of the Gardener Ben podcast. Thank you so much for your time. It really has once again been a pleasure talking to you. That just about concludes episode 3 of the Gardener Ben podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening. Next week, we're heading back to the UK and specifically to Scotland. I'm going to be talking to Karen, who uses the internet handles Rake Expectations, one of my favourite positive and uplifting Instagram accounts. So join me next week, and until then, happy gardening.